3 weeks passed without incident. The ironclad drifted through the empty dark of Sector KR-7741 with its escorts. 2 smaller patrol ships named the Gallant and the Harlow. There was nothing to see. No enemy movement. No signals. No traffic. The stars out here were cold and distant, and nobody in the coalition cared what happened between them. The crew kept sharp anyway. Nathan Cole ran daily drills. Megan Holt monitored long-range sensors with the kind of focus that made her junior officers nervous, because she never seemed to blink. Derek Vance trained his Marines in the cargo hold every morning, running them through close-quarters combat scenarios in full Bastion armor until the deck plates were scratched and dented from the weight of their boots. It was Megan who saw it first. She was on the bridge running a routine scan sweep when a cluster of readings appeared at the far edge of sensor range. They were faint, almost lost in the background noise of the asteroid fields nearby, but they were moving in a formation that no natural object would follow. She adjusted the filters, cleaned up the signal, and felt the blood drain from her face. 5 fast attack cruisers and a carrier-class vessel. Kreth military signatures. They had dropped out of faster-than-light travel deep inside the border zone, far closer to Coalition space than any previous incursion on record. And they were not heading for the expected front lines where the main Coalition fleet was waiting. They were driving straight through the empty sectors, the ones nobody was watching, aimed directly at Verath Prime. Megan reported it to Nathan immediately. He was in his quarters, reviewing supply logs, and was on the bridge within 90 seconds. He looked at the sensor data, asked Megan to confirm it twice, and then stood very still for a moment. A Kreth strike force heading for the station where the entire Coalition leadership was gathered. A decapitation strike. Cut off the head, and the body falls apart. He ordered a priority warning sent to Coalition Command through the standard relay network. The response was silence, then static, then nothing. The relay stations between their sector and the inner systems were being jammed, probably by Kreth infiltrators who had been planted weeks in advance. The warning was not getting through. Nathan looked at his crew. He looked at the sensor display showing the Kreth fleet moving fast and unopposed toward the heart of the Coalition. He did the math in his head. The Kreth would reach Verath Prime in less than 14 hours. The main Coalition fleet was 3 sectors away, in the wrong direction. Even if the warning got through right now, it would take hours for anyone to respond, and longer to redeploy. He made the call. The ironclad and its 2 escorts would move to intercept the Kreth fleet at the narrowest point of the KR-7741 corridor, a tight passage between 2 dense asteroid fields. They could not win a direct fight against a force this size. Nathan knew that. Everyone on the bridge knew that. But they could block the corridor. They could slow the Kreth down. They could buy time. Maybe enough time for Megan to find another way to get the warning out. The ship went to battle stations. The sound of the alarm echoed through every corridor, every compartment, every bunk room. Crew members who had been sleeping were on their feet and moving within seconds. In the armory, Derek Vance and his Marines were already suited up. They had been training in their Bastion armor when the alarm sounded, so they simply stopped training and started preparing for the real thing. Vance gathered his Marines in the main hangar bay. 47 men and women in full Mark 7 Bastion suits, each one carrying enough armor to stop a ground vehicle. He looked at them through his visor and told them what was coming. A Kreth fleet. A boarding action, probably. The hardest fight any of them had ever faced. He did not make a speech. He did not promise them victory. He told them to trust their armor and trust each other, and that was enough. The ironclad reached the choke point first. Nathan positioned the ship at the narrowest gap between the asteroid fields, with the Gallant and the Harlow flanking on either side. It was not a strong position. It was the only position they had. The Kreth arrived 30 minutes later, 5 cruisers and a carrier, moving in a sharp wedge formation, fast and aggressive. They did not attempt communication. They did not slow down. The lead cruiser opened fire the moment it had a clear line on the ironclad, and the dark of space lit up with plasma. The battle was brutal. The ironclad's heavy hull plating took hits that would have cut through lighter coalition vessels. Nathan used the asteroid field for cover, rotating the ship to spread damage across multiple hull sections, buying minutes with every maneuver. The Gallant was hit first, a concentrated volley from two cruisers that broke through its shields and tore the ship apart in seconds. The Harlow lasted longer, pulling behind an asteroid cluster and firing from cover, until a Kreth cruiser flanked it and put 3 shots through its reactor housing. It went dark and drifted. The ironclad was alone. Nathan kept fighting. The ship's weapons scored hits on 2 Kreth cruisers, damaging one badly enough to force it out of formation. But the carrier was untouched, and it was moving into position. Boarding pods began launching from its belly, dozens of them, small and fast, and aimed at the ironclad's hull. The ship shuddered as the pods hit. Metal screamed as cutting tools began burning through the outer hull. Nathan, bleeding from a cut on his forehead where a console had exploded beside him, gave the order that everyone had been expecting. All hands, repel boarders. The Kreth came through the hull breaches fast. They were tall, lean predators with hard gray skin and 4 arms, each one carrying a high-energy plasma weapon designed to overload and burn through the light energy shields used by most coalition species. Against Veloxi or Polari soldiers, these weapons were devastating. 1 or 2 hits would collapse a personal energy shield, and the soldier behind it would burn. The first squad of Kreth rounded a corner in Corridor 4 and ran straight into Derek Vance and 6 Marines. The Kreth opened fire without hesitation. Plasma bolts, bright white and searing hot, slammed into the humans. The reactive gel layer inside the Bastion suits absorbed the thermal energy and spread it across the suit's surface. The ceramic composite plating cracked under the impact, but held together. The kinetic dampeners reduced the force of each hit to something survivable. The Marines stumbled. One dropped to a knee. But none of them fell. None of them died. They raised their weapons and fired back. The Kreth hesitated. It was only a fraction of a second, but it was real. They had never fought anything that absorbed plasma fire and remained standing. Their entire combat doctrine was built around the idea that energy shields fail and the person behind them dies. But there were no shields here. There was just metal and ceramic and gel and the stubborn humans inside them, and none of it was failing the way it was supposed to. Vance led the counterattack. His squad pushed forward through the corridor, walking through plasma fire that scorched and dented their armor, but did not stop them. The Kreth fell back. In Corridor 7, another squad of Marines held a junction point against a Kreth assault team for over 40 minutes, taking hit after hit, their suits cracking and burning and breaking in layers, each layer peeling away to reveal another layer underneath. The boarding action lasted 4 hours. The Kreth had numbers, they had speed and ferocity, but the humans had armor that did not stop working when it was damaged. It just got thinner, and by the time it got thin enough to fail, most of the Kreth soldiers in that corridor were already down. The Kreth boarding force retreated. They pulled back to their pods and withdrew to the carrier. They had lost nearly a third of their ground troops, taking nothing. The Kreth fleet commander paused. The delay at the choke point had already cost 4 hours. The carrier had spent troops and gained nothing. And somewhere behind them, the crippled ironclad was still alive, still watching, still sending data to anyone who might be listening. On the battered bridge of the ironclad, Nathan Cole sat in his chair, with blood on his face and broken ribs under his uniform. Megan Holt was working frantically at her console, trying to find any way to push a signal past the jammed relays. Derek Vance stood at the bridge entrance in his ruined armor, one arm hanging at a bad angle, reporting that the boarders were gone and asking what came next. Nathan told him to get his arm looked at. Vance said he would do that after they won. Nathan almost smiled at that, but his ribs hurt too much. The Kreth fleet began moving again, slower now, more cautious. But it was still heading for Vareth Prime. The clock was still ticking, and the humans had done everything they could. Almost everything. While the ironclad had been bleeding and burning at the choke point, Megan Holt had been fighting a different kind of battle. The standard communication relays were jammed. Every primary channel she tried came back dead or choked with interference. The Kreth had planned this well. They had placed signal disruptors along the relay chain weeks before their fleet ever moved. And whoever had designed the jamming pattern knew exactly which frequencies the Coalition used. But Megan had not spent 9 years as a communications and tactical officer by giving up when the first door closed. During a brief pause in the boarding action, when the ship's power system stabilized just enough to give her full access to the deep space antenna array, she found another path. The antenna was damaged, but still functional. She could not push a signal through the jammed relays, but she did not need to. Scattered through the neighboring star system were a series of old mining relay buoys, small automated stations left behind by a mining company that had gone bankrupt years ago. Nobody used them. Nobody maintained them. But they were still powered, and their signal repeaters still worked. Megan bounced her transmission off 3 of those buoys in sequence, hopping the signal around the jam zone like a stone skipping across water. The signal was weak. It was broken up and full of static. But it carried the data that mattered. The Kreth fleet's composition, its heading, its speed, and its estimated arrival time at Vareth Prime. The signal reached a Polari listening post on the edge of the inner systems. The officer on duty was a young Polari named Tessic, who had never handled a real combat alert in his career. When the garbled human transmission came through, he almost dismissed it as interference. The signal was messy, and the source was unfamiliar. But something in the data caught his attention. He ran the trajectory numbers through his navigation computer and watched the projected course line extend straight from the empty border sectors to Vareth Prime. He forwarded the alert up the chain immediately. At Vareth Prime, the Coalition Council was in the middle of a routine session about supply logistics when the alert arrived. The room went silent as the tactical display updated with the new information. A Kreth carrier group, 5 cruisers and a carrier, heading directly for the station. Estimated arrival in under 10 hours. The reaction was chaos. Ambassador Thyrell of the Veloxi stood from her seat and demanded to know how a Kreth strike force had penetrated Coalition space without detection. The answer was uncomfortable, and everyone in the room already knew it. The fleet had come through the empty sectors, the ones that nobody thought were worth defending, the ones assigned to the humans precisely because they did not matter. The Coalition's main defense fleet was positioned 3 sectors away along the northern border, facing the direction that all intelligence reports had said the Kreth would attack from. Redeploying that fleet to Vareth Prime in time was impossible. The station's own defenses were light, designed to deal with smugglers and small pirate groups, not a full military assault force. The Draven representative slammed one massive fist on the table and demanded action. The Polari delegation began calculating which nearby ships could be redirected. The Veloxi command staff opened emergency channels to every vessel within range, but the math was bad. The only combat-capable ships near Vareth Prime were a single Draven heavy cruiser and 2 Polari frigates that had been assigned to diplomatic escort duty. Against a Kreth carrier group, they would last minutes. Then a second transmission arrived. This one was clearer, sent on a tighter beam, and routed through the same mining buoy network that Megan had discovered. It came from the ironclad. It came from Nathan Cole. His message was short and direct. He reported that his ship had engaged the Kreth fleet at the KR 7741 choke point and delayed them for over 4 hours. He reported that the Kreth boarding force had been repelled with heavy enemy casualties. He reported that the ironclad was badly damaged, but still mobile at reduced speed, and was currently shadowing the Kreth fleet at maximum safe distance, feeding real-time tracking data through the buoy relay. The tactical officers in the room understood immediately what those 4 hours meant. 4 hours changed the calculation from hopeless to possible. A Veloxi and Polari fast response squadron was currently positioned 2 sectors away on a training exercise. At maximum speed, they could reach Verith Prime within the new window that the ironclad sacrifice had created. The defense was no longer a fantasy. It was tight, it was desperate, but it was real. Orders went out. The fast response squadron broke from its exercise pattern and burned hard for Verith Prime. The Draven cruiser and Polari frigates moved to defensive positions around the station. Ground troops were pulled from barracks and garrison posts and deployed to the station's internal defense points. Every shuttle, every transport, every armed vessel in the area was called in. While the military scrambled, the intelligence officers on the council did something else. They pulled the combat logs that Nathan had transmitted, along with his status report. The logs included helmet camera footage from the boarding action on the ironclad. The footage was played on the main display in the council chamber. Every delegate, every officer, every ambassador watched. They saw Derek Vance and his Marines standing in a corridor as Kreth plasma bolts hammered into them. They saw the bright white flashes of impact against the Bastion suits. They saw ceramic crack and gel hiss and plating buckle. And they saw the Marines still standing. They saw them raise their weapons and fire back. They saw them advance through fire that should have killed them. They watched a Kreth shock trooper fire 6 consecutive plasma bolts into a Marine's chest plate at close range. The armor broke in layers. The outer ceramic shattered. The gel layer underneath burned away. The second ceramic layer cracked. And the Marine, a woman whose suit tag read Corporal Lisa Garner, absorbed every hit, closed the distance, and knocked the Kreth soldier to the ground with her armored shoulder. They watched Vance lead a push through Corridor 7, his squad walking through a sustained plasma barrage that lit up the hallway like daylight. Their suits were scorched black. Pieces of plating were falling off as they moved, and they kept moving. The room was very quiet when the footage ended. Sulin, the Polari military attaché who had stood in front of a Bastion suit display 3 weeks earlier and called it a monument to fear, was sitting in the second row. He had not spoken since the footage began. His feathers, which normally lay flat and composed against his body, were slightly raised, a Polari sign of deep emotional response. He watched the final clip, a shot from a ceiling-mounted camera showing a corridor after the fighting had passed. The walls were black with plasma scoring. The deck was littered with Kreth bodies, and walking through it, slowly, heavily, covered in damage, but very much alive, were 4 human Marines heading to the next defensive position. Sulin leaned forward in his chair and asked very quietly how quickly the humans could manufacture more of those suits. Nobody laughed. Ambassador Thyro, who 3 weeks ago had compared the armor to coffins, said nothing at all. She simply watched the display as it replayed the moment when the Marines walked through plasma fire, and her compound eyes did not blink. The council session shifted from panic to planning. With the tracking data streaming in from the ironclad and the fast response squadron burning toward them at maximum speed, the defenders of Verith Prime began to organize a real defense. Positions were assigned. Fields of fire were mapped. Evacuation routes for civilian personnel were opened. And in every tactical discussion, in every planning session, in every deployment order, the same question kept coming up. Where will the humans be? Where are the soldiers with the heavy armor? Where do we put the ones who do not fall down? Somewhere in the dark between the stars, the ironclad limped forward on half power, trailing debris and leaking atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches. On its bridge, Nathan Cole sat in his chair with his ribs wrapped and his arm in a makeshift sling, watching the Kreth fleet on his sensor display and sending course updates through Megan's relay network every 15 minutes. Megan was at her station, exhausted but awake, keeping the signal alive. She had not slept in over 30 hours. The relay buoys were old and unreliable, and she had to constantly adjust the signal path as they drifted and fluctuated. Every time one dropped out, she found another. She kept the chain unbroken through sheer stubbornness and skill. Derek Vance was in the medical bay getting his arm properly set. The ship's medic told him the bone was fractured in 2 places and he should not move it for at least a week. Vance asked her to wrap it tight and give him something for the pain. She told him that was a terrible idea. He told her there was a battle coming and he planned to be in it. She wrapped his arm and gave him the medication, because she had served with him long enough to know that arguing would waste time neither of them had. The Kreth fleet moved on toward Verath Prime, slower than before, more cautious, but still coming, and behind them, battered and broken and refusing to stop, the ironclad followed. The Kreth fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Verath Prime system, and found something they did not expect. The station was not undefended. The Draven heavy cruiser had positioned itself directly between the Kreth approach vector and the station, its rail cannons already charged and aimed. The 2 Polari frigates flanked the station at wide angles, their holographic systems filling the space around them with false sensor signatures and phantom ship images. And coming in fast from the far side of the system, still 20 minutes from weapons range, but closing hard, was the Veloxi and Polari Fast Response Squadron. The Kreth commander had 2 choices: wait for the reinforcements to arrive and face a combined fleet, or strike now while the defenders were still thin. The Kreth did not become a dominion by being cautious. The cruisers surged forward. The space battle over Verath Prime was violent and fast. The Veloxi fast attack fighters were the first to engage at range, their small ships darting between the Kreth cruisers with incredible speed, firing precision strikes at engine housings and weapon arrays before pulling away too quickly to be targeted. They were beautiful to watch and almost impossible to hit. The Polari frigates added to the confusion by projecting dozens of false targets, making the Kreth fire control systems chase shadows, while real ships struck from unexpected angles. The Draven cruiser did what Draven ships always did. It pointed itself at the biggest enemy and started hitting it with everything it had. But the Kreth carrier held back from the naval fight. While its cruisers engaged the coalition fleet, it launched troop transports aimed at Verath Prime itself. The station was the target. Take the station, take the leadership, and the coalition falls apart regardless of what happens in space. A dozen transports streaked toward the station's outer hull sections, and the defending fleet could not stop all of them. 7 made it through. They crashed into the hull, burned through the outer plating, and began pouring Kreth soldiers into the corridors of Verath Prime. Inside the station, the ground defense was a patchwork of every species that had troops available. Veloxi light infantry held the commercial districts, their speed allowing them to respond quickly to breaches, but their light energy shields leaving them dangerously exposed to sustained Kreth plasma fire. Polari marksmen took positions at key junctions, their aim superb, but their physical protection almost non-existent once their holographic cover was broken. Draven heavy troopers guarded the critical systems, reactor, communications, command center, their massive bodies filling corridors, but their movements slow and cumbersome in the tight spaces. The Kreth hit them hard. Their shock troops moved fast through the station's corridors, firing plasma weapons in sustained bursts, designed to overload energy shields, and burn through whatever was behind them. In the first 30 minutes, 2 Veloxi platoons were shattered. Their personal shields, the same technology that had seemed so superior to human armor, collapsed under concentrated fire. And the soldiers behind those shields had nothing. They burned. A Polari squad defending the station's water processing plant was flanked and cut off. Their holographic projectors were destroyed by a Kreth grenade, and without their illusions, they were just thin-bodied avians with rifles. They fought bravely, and they died quickly. The Kreth were pushing inward on 3 fronts, methodical and brutal, and the coalition ground forces were bleeding out faster than they could be reinforced. Then the ironclad arrived. It came limping into the system on half power, venting atmosphere from a dozen wounds, its hull scorched and cratered from the battle at KR 7741. It could barely maneuver, and its weapons were mostly offline. It was not a warship anymore. It was a wreck that had not yet admitted it was a wreck. But it carried something the defense needed more than another gun. Nathan Cole gave the order from his broken bridge. Every combat-capable Marine on the ironclad boarded the assault shuttles in the hangar bay. 43 men and women in Bastion armor, their suits already damaged and patched from the first fight, crammed into 4 shuttles and launched directly at Varith Prime. Nathan watched them go from the bridge view screen. He could not go with them. His injuries would not allow it. He had given everything he could to get them here. The rest was theirs. Derek Vance was in the lead shuttle. His left arm was wrapped and braced inside his suit. Functional, but painful. He did not care about the pain. He briefed his Marines on the way in. Short and direct. The station was under assault. Coalition forces were losing. They were going to land and reinforce the weakest points. Their job was simple. Stand where others could not stand, and take what others could not take. The shuttles hit the docking bays hard. The Marines poured out and immediately moved into the station's corridor network, guided by tactical data streaming from the station's defense command. Vance split his force into 4 squads and sent them to the sectors that were closest to collapse. In the commercial district, a Veloxi platoon was pinned behind overturned market stalls and shattered storefronts. Their shields were failing. Kreth soldiers were advancing through the open concourse, firing continuously, and the Veloxi could not move without being cut down. They had already lost 1/3 of their number. Vance's first squad came through a service corridor behind the Veloxi position and walked straight into the open. The Kreth saw them and fired. Plasma bolts hit the lead Marine square in the chest, then the shoulders, then the legs. The Marine staggered. His ceramic plating cracked and smoked. He kept walking. The Marines behind him spread into a line and advanced, each one absorbing plasma fire that would have killed any Veloxi soldier in a single hit. The Veloxi watched from behind their cover. They watched humans take hit after hit and refuse to fall. They watched scorched, dented, cracking armor move forward through a storm of plasma fire like it was walking through rain. One Veloxi soldier, young and terrified, later said it was the most frightening and most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The Kreth in the commercial district broke. They were not prepared to fight enemies they could not kill with their primary weapons. They fell back toward the outer hull, and the first squad let them go. The priority was holding the line, not chasing. At the power junction in Section 9, a Polari squad was about to be overrun. Kreth soldiers were pushing through 2 doorways at once, and the Polari were out of holographic charges. A fire team of 4 human Marines arrived at a run. Corporal Lisa Garner took the lead. She was not a large woman. In her Bastion suit, she did not need to be. She stepped into the main doorway and planted herself there. The corridor was wide enough for 2 Kreth to pass side by side, and she filled it. The Kreth fired. Plasma bolts slammed into her chest, her helmet, her arms, her legs. Her outer plating cracked, then broke. then fell away in pieces. The gel layer underneath burned and hissed. The second layer of ceramic beneath that held, then cracked, then held again. She did not move. Behind her, the Polari evacuated their wounded through the back corridor. The other 3 Marines took positions beside her and added their fire. The Kreth push stalled, then broke. Garner stayed in that doorway for 11 minutes. By the time the Kreth pulled back, her suit's outer shell was almost entirely gone. She looked like a skeleton of armor, bare framework and inner layers exposed. She was burned across her back and shoulders where heat had penetrated the deepest cracks. She was still standing. In the lower maintenance tunnels, Derek Vance encountered the worst of it. A Kreth shock squad, their best soldiers, was making a direct push for the station's reactor core. If they reached it, they could overload it and destroy the entire station. Vance and 8 Marines blocked the tunnel. The fight was close and savage. The tunnels were narrow, and the Kreth shock troops carried plasma blades, short-range cutting weapons designed for exactly this kind of combat. One Kreth soldier lunged at Vance with a blade that cut through the joint seal on his left arm, partially melting the already damaged section and sending a spike of white-hot pain through his body. Vance grabbed the Kreth's weapon arm with his armored right hand and broke it. The Kreth screamed. Vance hit it again, and it stopped screaming. He kept moving. His squad held that tunnel for 26 minutes. 3 Marines were killed. 5 more were wounded. Every surviving suit was breached in at least one place. But the Kreth never reached the reactor. The turning point came when the Kreth ground commander made his mistake. He saw that his forces were failing in every sector where humans were deployed. So he pulled troops from the other assault vectors to concentrate against the armored Marines. It was logical from his perspective. Remove the strong point, and the defense collapses. But it meant weakening his push against the Veloxi and Polari and Draven positions. And those soldiers, given breathing room for the first time since the assault began, regrouped and counterattacked. Above the station, the Coalition fleet finally broke through the Kreth naval screen. The Veloxi fighters swarmed the troop transports. The Polari frigates cut off the retreat routes. The Draven cruiser put 2 rail cannon rounds through the Kreth carrier's hangar bay. Cut off from their fleet and bleeding troops in every corridor, the Kreth ground forces pulled back toward their landing zones. The Coalition pushed them out, sector by sector, corridor by corridor. The last Kreth transport lifted off from the station's hull and limped back toward its carrier under fire from 3 directions. The battle was over. Varath Prime held. Derek Vance sat down on the floor of the maintenance tunnel, with his back against the wall, and his broken arm cradled against his chest. Around him, his surviving Marines did the same. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say that the silence did not say better. The medical wing of Varath Prime was not built to handle this many wounded. Beds lined every wall. Overflow patients lay on emergency cots in the corridors. Medics from 6 different species worked side by side, treating injuries they had never seen on anatomies they did not fully understand. A Veloxi nurse cleaned burns on a Draven soldier's shoulder. A human field medic stitched a gash on a Polari marksman's wing. The war had made them strangers. The aftermath was making them something else. The numbers told a story that nobody in the Coalition could ignore. The Veloxi ground forces had suffered over 60% casualties. Their personal energy shields, the technology they had been so proud of, had failed under sustained Kreth plasma fire, exactly the way Nathan Cole would later explain. When the shields went down, there was nothing between the soldier and the weapon. The Polari had lost nearly half their fighters. The Draven, tougher by nature, had still taken heavy losses because even their thick hides and personal barriers could not withstand concentrated plasma at close range. The human Marines had suffered a 22% casualty rate. Of the 43 who had deployed from the Ironclad, 34 were still alive. 9 were dead. Every single survivor's armor was damaged so badly that several suits had to be cut off their wearers with emergency tools because the joints had fused shut from heat damage. The suits were ruined. The people inside them were not. That was the point. That had always been the point. Derek Vance spent the first day after the battle in the medical wing, not as a patient, although his arm was in a regeneration sleeve and he had burns across his left side that the medics were still treating. He spent it visiting the wounded, all of them, not just the humans. He sat with injured Veloxi soldiers in their ward. The Veloxi were fragile in recovery, their thin exoskeletons slow to heal, and many of them were frightened in ways that their culture did not easily allow them to express. Vance did not say much. He brought water. He sat nearby. When a young Veloxi infantryman who had lost part of his left leg asked Vance if the armor had really worked as well as the footage showed, Vance told him the truth. He said the armor worked exactly as well as it looked, and that it hurt exactly as much as it looked, and that being inside a suit that was being hit by plasma fire was one of the most terrifying experiences a person could have, even if the suit held. The Veloxi soldier seemed grateful for the honesty. Vance visited the Polari wounded too. He checked on the marksmen who had fought beside his squads in the station corridors. He did not know their names, but they knew his, or at least they knew what his armor looked like, and that was enough for recognition. It was there, in the Polari recovery ward, that Sulin found him. The military attaché walked in quietly and sat down on a chair beside Vance without asking permission. He sat there for a while, watching the wounded, saying nothing. Then he spoke. He said that he owed the sergeant an apology. He said that 3 weeks ago he had stood in front of a bastion suit and called it a monument to fear, and that he had been wrong. Vance looked at him. He was tired, and his arm hurt, and he had lost 9 people under his command, and he did not have the energy for politics or pride. He told Sulin that he did not owe him anything. He said that every species at the battle had brought what they had and fought with what they knew, and that was all anyone could ask. Sulin was quiet for a moment. Then he said that what the humans knew might save a great many lives going forward, if they were willing to share it. Vance said they were. 2 days later, the formal debriefing took place before the full Coalition Military Council. The chamber was the same one where humanity had been assigned its meaningless patrol sector 3 weeks earlier. The same seats, the same delegates, but the room felt entirely different. Commander Nathan Cole stood at the podium. His ribs were wrapped under his uniform. His arm was in a sling. He had refused pain medication before the session because he wanted his mind clear. He presented the Ironclad's combat data in a straightforward manner, without drama, and without any attempt to make the Coalition feel guilty for its earlier dismissal of human capabilities. He did not frame the data as vindication. He framed it as a lesson. Energy shields, he said, were excellent technology. They were light, efficient, and effective against most common threats. He meant that sincerely. But shields had a single point of failure. When the energy ran out, or the emitter was damaged, or the incoming fire was too intense, the shield collapsed completely. In that instant, the soldier went from fully protected to completely exposed. There was no middle ground. Human armor philosophy, he explained, was built on a different principle. It was heavy. It was slow. It required enormous physical conditioning and extensive training to operate in. It was expensive to manufacture and difficult to maintain. He did not hide any of these disadvantages. But it degraded gradually. There was no single moment of failure. Every layer that cracked or burned or broke still left another layer underneath. A Marine who had taken 20 hits was still more protected than an unshielded soldier who had taken none. The armor did not make soldiers invincible. It made them survivable. He proposed a hybrid approach. He suggested that coalition forces adopt a layered defense model, using energy shields as the first line of protection for speed and efficiency, backed by physical armor layers for the inevitable moment when those shields failed. He offered to share the full technical specifications of the Bastion suit system with every coalition member, without conditions. The room was silent when he finished. Ambassador Thyrol of the Veloxy rose from her seat. She was tall and thin, and her voice carried the formal tone of someone delivering a statement that she had prepared carefully. She acknowledged, formally and publicly, that the Galactic Coalition owed its survival to the human crew of the Ironclad and the Marines who had held the line, both at KR 7741 and inside the station itself. She said that 3 weeks ago she had compared human armor to coffins, and that she had been wrong in a way that she would remember for the rest of her life. She announced that the Veloxy would be the first species to formally request the armor technology transfer, and that she would personally oversee its integration into Veloxy military doctrine. The Draven representative spoke next. He did not apologize, because Draven culture did not work that way. But he proposed something better. He called for human tactical advisors to be embedded with every major coalition ground force to train soldiers in the combined shield and armor combat doctrine that Nathan had described. He said that his own troops would be the first to accept such advisors. The motion was put to a vote. It passed unanimously. In the weeks that followed, the Bastion suit became the most requested piece of military technology in Coalition history. Human engineers traveled to Veloxy worlds, Polari shipyards, and Draven military academies, working alongside alien counterparts to adapt the armor philosophy to species that had never imagined wearing anything so heavy. The Veloxy developed a lighter variant that traded some protection for the mobility their fighting style demanded. It was not as tough as a human Bastion suit, but it meant that a Veloxy soldier whose shield failed now had 3 physical layers between them and death, instead of none. The Draven went the other direction, building a heavier version that worked with their natural thick hide to create a defense so dense that Kreth plasma weapons were nearly useless against it. The Polari created something elegant, integrating physical armor plates into their holographic systems, so that enemy soldiers could not tell which parts of a Polari formation were real and which were illusions, and the real ones were armored. The Kreth Dominion watched these developments through its intelligence networks. Their entire military strategy had been built on one assumption, that coalition forces relied on energy shields that could be overwhelmed with concentrated plasma fire. The spread of physical armor across the coalition broke that assumption. For the first time, Kreth strategic planners began sending reports that expressed uncertainty about the outcome of a long war. On the Ironclad, now docked at a coalition repair facility and undergoing a full refit, Nathan Cole stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. The ship was being rebuilt with upgraded armor plating, some of it designed using feedback from the battle itself. It would be stronger when it returned to service. He wished the same could be said for the 9 Marines who would not be coming back. Megan Holt found him there. She stood beside him and told him that Ambassador Thyrell had sent a formal gift to the ship. It was a display case containing a fragment of Corporal Lisa Garner's destroyed chestplate, the one that had been nearly burned away during her stand in the doorway of Section 9. The fragment was mounted on a dark metal backing, with an inscription engraved in both Veloxy script and English. The inscription read, "The heaviest armor carries the lightest burden, for it carries its soldiers home." Nathan looked at it for a long moment. Then he told Megan to put it in the mess hall, where everyone could see it. She nodded and left to arrange it. Nathan stayed on the observation deck for a while longer. The stars did not look different. The war was not over. The Kreth were still out there, and more battles were coming. But something had changed, not just in the Coalition's strategy, but in the way the galaxy understood what humanity brought to the table. It was not speed, it was not elegance, It was not advanced energy technology. It was weight. It was endurance. It was the willingness to carry something heavy, because the heaviness was the point. On a Veloxi colony world, far from the front lines, a training facility had been built to prepare the next generation of Coalition soldiers for the new combined doctrine. A young Veloxi recruit stood in the equipment hall, staring at a hybrid armor suit that had been fitted for her species. It looked nothing like the Veloxi equipment she had trained with. It was bulky, dense, and when she put it on, the weight pressed down on her thin frame like nothing she had ever worn before. Her instructor was a human marine, a quiet man from the Coalition Advisory Program with old burn scars on his arms and a patient voice. He watched her struggle with the weight and told her it would get easier. She asked him, when? He smiled and said that the suit would never get lighter. She would just get stronger. She set her jaw, adjusted her grip on her rifle, and kept moving. Within 2 years of the Battle of Verith Prime, not a single Coalition species fielded ground forces without integrated physical armor. The Kreth Dominion never achieved another successful ground assault against Coalition positions. The suits were still heavy. The soldiers who wore them did not care. The station called Verith Prime floated in the darkness between 3 star systems, and on this day, it was full of aliens who did not like each other, but who feared the Kreth Dominion more than they feared sitting in the same room. Dozens of species had sent their best diplomats, their sharpest military officers, and their most important leaders to talk about how they would fight together against the empire that was burning its way across the Outer Rim. The Galactic Coalition was not built on friendship. It was built on survival. Humanity had only joined the Coalition 6 months earlier. They were the newest species at the table, and in the eyes of most aliens present, they were also the least impressive. Humans were slow compared to the Veloxi. They were small compared to the Draven. They had no natural armor, no venom, no ability to see in the dark or breathe underwater. What they did have, according to most assessments, was stubbornness and a strange willingness to keep showing up where they were not wanted. Commander Nathan Cole walked through the arrivals corridor of Verith Prime with his back straight and his face calm. He was a lean man in his early 40s, with short brown hair and the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of difficult service. Beside him walked Lieutenant Megan Holt, his tactical officer, a woman with sharp eyes and very little patience for people who wasted her time. Behind them both marched Sergeant Derek Vance and a squad of 12 human Marines in full combat gear. The gear was the problem. Or rather, the gear was what everyone wanted to stare at. The Marines wore Mark 7 Bastion suits, the standard combat armor of the human military. Each suit was a layered shell of ceramic composite plating over a reactive gel underlayer, backed by kinetic dampeners, sealed environment systems, and redundant life support. The suits were thick. They were angular. They made the humans look like walking blocks of metal. And each one weighed roughly 140 kilograms. Every alien in the corridor stopped and looked. Some looked with curiosity. Most looked with amusement. The Veloxi were the first to say something. They were tall, thin insectoids with legs built for speed and long arms that moved in quick, graceful motions. Their technology was based on light energy shields that wrapped around their bodies like a second skin, weighing almost nothing and deflecting most standard weapons fire. To them, the idea of carrying 140 kilograms of metal into battle was not just impractical. It was funny. Ambassador Thyrol, the Veloxi representative to the Coalition, was standing near the reception hall entrance when the humans walked past. She watched the Marines with her large compound eyes, tilted her narrow head, and said in a voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear that the humans appeared to be wearing their own coffins. Several delegations laughed. The Polari delegation, a group of tall avian creatures with shimmering feathers and holographic deflection technology, found the comment particularly entertaining. Their military attaché, a sharp and opinionated officer named Sulin, walked over to the display area where a Bastion suit had been set up as part of the human delegation's exhibit. He circled it slowly, tapped the chest plate with one long talon, and declared it a monument to fear. He said that no species with real shield technology would ever make its soldiers carry this much dead weight. He said, it was like watching someone bring a stone wall to a sword fight. The Draven, massive reptilian creatures who stood nearly 3 meters tall and relied on their own thick natural hide plus personal energy barriers, were less vocal, but no less dismissive. Their representative looked at the Bastion suit, then at the small humans inside their own suits, and simply shook his head. He muttered something that roughly translated to hatchling blankets. Nathan Cole heard all of it. He stood near the display with his hands clasped behind his back and said nothing. Megan Holt stood beside him, and he could feel her tension without looking at her. She wanted to respond. She wanted to pull up the combat data, the testing footage, the survival statistics. She wanted to ask Ambassador Tyrell how many Veloxi soldiers survived when their energy shields failed, because the answer was not many. But Nathan had given her a quiet order before they arrived. No defensiveness. They were here to join a coalition, not to win a debate about armor philosophy. So Megan kept her mouth shut, and it cost her. Derek Vance was even easier to read, mostly because there was nothing to read. He stood in his Bastion suit with his arms folded across his chest, and his face behind his visor completely blank. If the mockery bothered him, he gave no sign of it. He had been wearing heavy armor for 14 years. He had been shot, burned, blown up, and buried in rubble while wearing it, and he had walked away from all of those things. He did not need an alien diplomat to tell him what his suit was worth. The formal defense talks began the next morning in the Coalition's Grand Assembly Chamber. Each species presented its military capabilities, its fleet strength, its special technologies, and its proposed role in the joint defense against the Kreth. The Veloxi showed their fast attack fighters and their personal shield systems. The Polari demonstrated their holographic decoys and precision targeting. The Draven displayed their heavy cruisers and their brute force ground tactics. When the human turn came, Nathan Cole stood before the assembly and played footage from live fire training exercises. The videos showed Bastion-armored Marines advancing through fields of kinetic rounds, plasma splashes, and concussive explosions. The Marines took hits and kept walking. Plates cracked, and the soldiers kept moving. Entire sections of armor were blown apart, and the Marines behind them were still alive, still fighting, still pushing forward. The assembly watched politely. Then, the Veloxi chief tactician stood up, ran a quick calculation on the energy cost of moving that much mass at combat speed, and announced to the room that the human approach was strategically absurd. Nobody argued with her. At the end of the session, the Coalition Military Council assigned patrol sectors to each member species. The humans were given a stretch of empty border space near an uninhabited system called KR 7741. There was nothing there. No planets of value, no trade routes, no strategic positions. It was a token assignment, and everyone in the room knew it. The message was clear. The humans were welcome in the coalition, but nobody expected them to matter. Nathan accepted the assignment without a single word of protest. He thanked the council, gathered his delegation, and walked back to the docking bay where the warship Ironclad was waiting. In the corridor, away from alien ears, Megan finally spoke. She asked him why he had not pushed back. She asked if he was really going to let them shove humanity into a forgotten corner of the border while the real war happens somewhere else. She told him it was wrong, and she was not quiet about it. Nathan stopped walking and looked at her. He was not angry. He was not frustrated. He simply told her that the armor would speak for itself when the time came. Then he turned and kept walking toward the ship. Derek Vance, still in his suit, still silent, followed behind them. If anyone had looked closely at his visor, they might have seen the smallest hint of a smile. But nobody was looking at the humans anymore. As far as the coalition was concerned, the humans and their heavy, ridiculous armor had already been forgotten.